What's up, pumpers? Jerome here with another classic WoW TBC video. Today we're talking everything Resto Druid PvE best in slot. We'll cover all the stats you need to know. We'll explain how Haste works, everything you need to know to top the meters as a Resto Druid in Phase 3 TBC. Before we get started, please click that like button, hit the subscription button, and don't forget to click that notification bell or I won't be able to keep making videos just like this one. Alright, so as you may know, Black Temple and Hyjal are here, and they're an absolute blast. I've been loving doing these raids, really nostalgic, really fun, very well-designed raids, and I've even been doing Mount Hyjal trash farming as well, which gives you all sorts of great loot. You get epic items, you get materials, which you can use for crafting, and I'll get into that later. But TLDR, I'm having an absolute blast. I wanted to get out a guide on Resto Druid gearing, and this is something that I've really been excited about getting out because there's so much to talk about with Resto Druid gearing in Phase 3. We finally have a new stat that is really going to change how you play Resto Druid, and that's Spell Haste. So if you don't know what Spell Haste is a stat that's already existed in TBC, but for Resto Druids, it hasn't really had much of an impact yet, and it's about to have a massive impact. So what Haste does for a Resto Druid is not what a lot of people have said in the past. It does not increase the hot tick rate that you get. So you're not going to be getting more heals just from your hots increasing the tick rate. That's not going to be happening. What you get from Spell Haste as a Resto Druid is, number one, you get faster spell cast. So for example, your regrowth or your healing touch are going to be faster with more haste. And number two, you're going to be getting more global cooldowns. So basically, if you have a certain threshold of spell haste, which in this case is 113 for Resto Druids, you'll be able to roll a 5th Life Bloom. And this has huge implications for how you're going to play the class and the amount of extra healing you're going to be getting over the course of a fight. So you may be wondering, what does rolling a 5th Life Bloom actually mean? What does that actually mean for a Resto Druid? So essentially, a Resto Druid's rotation is going to always be sort of chained into Life Bloom. Life Bloom is your best heal over time. It's what you are there for. You are pumping these massive heals with Life Bloom. Your goal is to be always rolling 3 Life Blooms on every single tank that's going to be taking damage. So before the fight starts, you could pop out a regrowth, a rejuvenation on your tanks, and then boom, you're rolling the 3 Life Blooms on every single tank that's going to be taking damage. So essentially, all of your global cooldowns are constrained to keeping these Life Blooms on your tank, right? So let's say you have 3 tanks. You have a warrior, 2 paladins. So you need to be keeping your Life Blooms on all 3 of the tanks at all times. This means that your first global cooldown is going to go to the first tank, and it's going to be a Life Bloom. Your second global cooldown goes to the second tank, and it's a Life Bloom. Your third global cooldown goes to the third tank, also a Life Bloom. So that means you have 1 extra global cooldown before these Life Blooms fall off of the tanks to put, for example, a Life Bloom on someone else or a rejuvenation on one of your tanks or whatever you want to do with that extra global cooldown. Essentially, you have 1 free spike. You've got 1 vacation day for every 3 days of work, for example. So with Spell Haste, if you hit that threshold of 113, what that means is you get an extra Life Bloom. So that means your first tank gets a Life Bloom, your second tank gets a Life Bloom, your third tank gets a Life Bloom, then you have a free spot, then you have a free spot, then your first tank gets a Life Bloom, then your second tank gets a Life Bloom, then your third tank gets a Life Bloom, then you have 2 more free spots. So what that means is you have 2 extra spots, and you can do all sorts of interesting things with that. For example, you could, keep up rejuvenation on your tanks, or you could put Life Blooms on other people in the raid. There's a lot of implications for that extra haste, but as you can already see, that may not always be the best possible scenario. So let's say you only have 1 tank, he's the only person in the raid taking any damage at all. Then all of a sudden, it doesn't really make sense to lose healing power in order to gain that extra Life Bloom, because there's no real point of you rolling an extra Life Bloom. So haste is not always 100% of the time the absolute best thing for Resto Druid. It's going to vary depending on the fights, because if only 1 person is taking damage or only 2 people are taking damage, what's the actual point of that extra Life Bloom? What's that point of that extra vacation day, for example? Let's say only 1 or 2 tanks are taking damage, and that's literally it. Then all of a sudden, it doesn't make sense to have that extra vacation day. You don't need 5 global cooldowns to maintain your Life Blooms and your rejuvenation, for example. You're all set. It's not that haste is useless on a Resto Druid. It's just that there's very specific reasons why you want it, It's not always going to be BIS in every single situation to have the extra haste. There's also diminishing returns on a Resto Druid right now with spell haste. So for example, let's say you get to 180 spell haste. This doesn't really do that much for you because you're not going to get that extra vacation day, right? You're not getting that extra 6 life bloom roll. It's not going to even be that relevant for you because you're not getting that 6 life bloom roll. You're only going to be getting a faster regrowth, for example. Keep in mind that when we're talking spell haste, having the bare minimum of 113 is not always optimal because things like ping can also get in the way. So let's say you have 113 spell haste and your ping is you know, an extra 20 milliseconds compared to the average Resto Druid. All of a sudden, it's going to be even harder to roll those life blooms because you're cutting it really close. So you may want to have a small extra amount of haste. So let's say 140, 150. That gives you a longer window. That gives you a little more time. And so having a higher ping isn't going to hurt you. You're not going to randomly lag out and then miss a life bloom. And there are reasons to have more than 113. Spell haste, for example, ping is a great reason, but you're not going to want to stack, say, 200 spell haste. It's not really going to do anything for you. And keep in mind, all of the spell haste gear, pretty much, with one exception being the gloves, all of these pieces are going to have worse healing stats and worse stats. So you're not going to want to pump haste the way you might think. It's really there to get you to that threshold. And then from that point forward, you stack as much healing as humanly possible. Now that we've explained spell haste, it's going to make a lot more sense to gear your character, because essentially, until you have 113 spell haste worth of gear, it doesn't actually make any sense for a Resto Druid to actually bother putting any spell haste on their character. So basically what that means is you don't have to rush out and get a bunch of spell haste right now. You can slowly build up your set, and then once you have enough spell haste, you swap over to this new spell haste set. And so there's basically one little tiny mini step you can make to have more spell haste faster, and that is to have crafted gear. And there are 2 crafted pieces you can get. Well, technically there's 4. There's cloth and there's leather pieces you can get, but we're going to be going cloth across the board here. The one thing to note on these crafted haste pieces is that when you do have your true BIS set, you're only going to use one of the crafted BIS pieces because otherwise you would lose a significant amount of healing power. So it's worth it to just have one. As an intermediary, if you are missing, for example, one piece like the haste gloves or the haste belt, you could temporarily swap in an extra crafted piece. And when we get to that point, I will talk about it. Don't worry, you're all covered in this guide. The important thing to note is that there are 2 different builds I'm going to show you. A maximum healing power build, which is going to go as crazy high as you can with the healing power. This build is going to essentially be your stopgap until you have more haste. There's no real point running that haste, so we're going to keep the haste off on the side, and when you have enough haste, we're going to swap it in, and you're going to have the best possible Resto Druid healing set for Phase 3. Alright, so let's get to the first set, and like I just explained, this is going to be your maximum healing power set. This is the set you run until you have 113 spell haste on your Resto Druid. Until that point, it doesn't make sense to have spell haste. Remember, you're not going to get that extra life bloom roll until you hit 113 or higher spell haste. And keep in mind, we do want to go a little bit higher than 113, like I said, because of things like ping. You may end up missing a life bloom roll if you have, for example, really, really bad internet. You're not going to want to just stay at 113. Let's get a little bit higher. We're going to end up around 130. Another thing that's very important to note is that the spell haste gems are not in the game yet. This means there is not a lot of gearing options. Really, realistically, everyone's going to pretty much run the same things with small variations. There aren't a lot of options right now because of the lack of spell haste gems. If we did have spell haste gems, we could get a lot cuter with the gear. We could, for example, put a spell haste gem in, swap out another piece of spell haste gear, and have even more healing power, but that's not something in the cards right now until the spell haste gems get added. Theoretically, that could be ZA or Phase 5, but hopefully very soon. Alright, so let's get right into our gearing for the maximum healing power build. Keep in mind, alright, so let's get into our build. Keep in mind, both of these builds, these haste builds, are going to be run with enchanting, and then the option of either leatherworking or engineering. Personally, I'm going engineering, but you could go leatherworking. Another option you have is to go tailoring for a bind on pickup shoulder for haste, which we'll talk about in the other build. Keep in mind, we're going to be running enchanting for the 40 healing power on the rings, 20 each, massive healing power, plus lots of gold making to be had. If you want to go do heroics, for example, make a lot of gold. And then the option of either leatherworking or engineering. Engineering if you're running, for example, speedrun guild. Less valuability with PvP. For example, the belt doesn't work in PvP anymore. So engineering not as necessary anymore. I would definitely look into leatherworking if your guild is looking for that. Drums are only going to get better from here on out, and tons of viability with leatherworking. But it's right now, it's sort of a flex option. You don't have to pick one or the other. It's really up to you. All right, so getting into our headpiece, we're going to be running the Thunderheart helmet. This is the best option we have. And one thing to note about Thunderheart in general, the set bonuses are not worth it. The Swiftman cooldown is not worth it. And the healing touch bonus healing is also not worth it. So nothing we do is going to be keeping these set bonuses in mind at all. We're just going to pretend they don't exist. They're not going to matter. One thing to note when you're looking at the two options we have, which are the Thunderheart helmet and the Cowl of Benevolence. These are both great options. The Cowl of Benevolence is almost identical in stats. If it drops and nobody in your guild wants it, you should take it. It's perfectly adequate. You could run it all the way through the phase. Personally, I wouldn't jump at the chance to get the Cowl when the Thunderheart is definitely better. So that's going to just be your call on what your guild is doing. One thing to note as well, we're going to be running the Bracing Earthstorm Diamond. This is still your best option with the 26 healing power, and the 2% reduced threat is such an underrated bonus of this gem. Definitely BIS for PvE. For PvP, of course, you would run the Bracing Earthstorm, but that's for another day. One thing worth noting as well is we're going to be running full new epic gems. These are real expensive right now, so you're going to have to run a temporary Teardrop Living Ruby if you can't afford these, but you're eventually going to want the Teardrop Crimson Spinels with the 22 healing power. Absolutely fantastic. And obviously 35 healing power enchant on the headpiece. Now we're getting to the necklace. Necklace is controversial. Most guys would say get the Lord Sanguinar's claim, but technically speaking, it is slightly worse than Nadina's Pendant of Purity, which is obviously going to be contested. Resto Druid, the least useful for spell crit, because your life blooms, you're going to be rolling them the whole time, so you're not going to get that crit on the pop. It's pretty marginal, not that useful. Regrowth, obviously, you get a little bit of crit there, but overall, Resto Druid least on the priority for this, but it's still easier to get than the Verdant Sphere, so if it's available, I would take it. Slightly better than Lord Sanguinar's claim. And again, you're not getting much from the crit, but it is a small upgrade, definitely worth getting. All right, so let's get into the cloak, and the cloak is such a fascinating part of the Resto Druid gearing this time around, because the two options are so close that I would definitely lean towards, if you have the choice, putting the Haste cloak at the top of your priority list. And as you can see, I don't have it on this gear list. That's because it's slightly worse in healing power. But if you have the option, if you are given the option, absolutely a million times over, go for the Shroud of Highborn. This is going to be your BIS piece by a million miles. You have to have it to get to the 113 spell haste, and it's so close in stats. And the thing I want to drive home here is that the spell haste gear usually comes at the cost of significant healing power stats, but not in this case. You're only going to be losing literally 11 healing power. Okay, that is such a small amount of lost healing power. It is absolutely your prio BIS piece to get. Do not go for the Shroud of Forgiveness if you can avoid it. All right, if you're given the option, definitely go for the Shroud of the Highborn. Most guilds will probably see more Shroud of the Forgiveness, so if this is your luck, you're probably going to end up with one, but that's a temporary piece. You definitely want the Shroud of Highborn from Illidan eventually. All right, so getting into our chest piece, we're getting a new small upgrade here. This is a very marginal upgrade, but the Thunderheart Tunic replaces the Nordisil chest guard, which, thank God, replaced the Primal Mooncloth robe, which means you don't have to have tailoring anymore if you don't want it. And yeah, it's an upgrade for sure, and it's something you're going to have eventually. But there's no other option here, so we don't really have to think about it too much. Just eventually replace your Nordisil chest guard or your, hopefully not, Primal Mooncloth robe with the wonderful Thunderheart Tunic. And just know we're going to be running 15 Spirit on the chest like always, and covering the cloak from before. We're going to be running 2% reduced threat, and if you want to cheap out, that's your prerogative, but I really do think it makes a difference, and especially on trash packs like Hyjal, for example, you don't want to have a little bit of extra threat. You want to make sure your threat is under control. All right, so let's get into the bracer, and not to be a Buzz Killington here, but the beautiful rejuvenating bracers, which are BIS in terms of stats, that I personally have myself and have gemmed out and enchanted and are fantastic, and they give you that beautiful healing power, and they're absolutely fantastic. You're not going to be able to run them long term because you're going to end up with spell haste, and the spell haste pieces are missing that gem slot, so they're not as good as stat wise. just not as fun, not as exciting. But you have two options here. You have the Swift Heal Wraps if you want to go the tailoring route, BOEs on both of these, or you can do the Braces of Renewed Life long term. But keep in mind that you're not going to be running the haste bracers until you have 113 haste. So by all means, have fun. Be Patrick and SpongeBob running around and having fun using your rejuvenating bracers, or you could even have just as much fun with the bracers of martyrdom. Just enjoy all that extra healing before you lose it for the rest of the phase because you have to run haste. Alright, so not to be too much of a Debbie Downer here and give you another piece of devastating Druid news, but your BIS mace, your BIS healing mace, the Crystal Spire of Karabor with 486 healing, it's such a beautiful mace. Unfortunately, the effect on this beautiful piece of machinery is only for direct heals, which means that you're going to be the absolute last person to get this in your guild. Everyone else has priority, all the paladins and God knows what. They're all going to take this from you. So you're going to get this last, and you're going to feel real bad about it. It's a fantastic mace. It has 486 healing power, like I said. Really, really great stats. The effect is only for direct heal, so it's only going to work on things like regrowth, not on your beautiful life blooms. Until you have it, the Light Fathom Scepter is perfectly adequate, though you're losing 43 healing power, which is real rough. Obviously, you also have the Vengeful Gladiator Salvation as well as an option if you're a PvP fan, and that's going to kind of close the distance a little bit. You're still going to be down 22 healing power compared to that beautiful Crystal Spire of Karabor, but it closes the distance and gets you closer, and I already PvP anyways, so that's definitely what I'm going to aim for in the interim. In positive news, we do have a new offhand upgrade for the first time in the entirety of TBC. You've been running the Tears of Heaven probably for, 7 months now. But here we go, the Scepter of Purification, 77 healing power. Got some great spirit, 25 spirit. You get 17 and 24 stam. Definitely the upgrade to go with. There's no other option here. This is the play. Alright, so let's get into the weird piece of gear for Resto Druids for the tier. Seems like a tradition every single phase. There's some weird thing for Resto Druids that makes no sense balancing wise, and this time around it's the Botanist Gloves of Growth. These things not only have the best healing power, but they also have all the spell haste as well. So there's literally no other option. All the other options comparatively are complete garbage. Finally get to say goodbye to your Midst of the Tree Mender and say hello to the most broken and disgustingly great gloves you've ever seen. These things should be near the top of your loot list. They are just absolutely incredible. And 37 spell haste, BIS healing for the phase. No other option, in my opinion, for a Resto Druid for gloves. And of course, we're going to tack on the 35 healing and the 12 spell damage enchant. One other thing I forgot to mention earlier is that we're going to be running the 81 healing power on the mace, of course. That's your only option for this phase. Getting into the belt, we do have a little bit of a confusion thing here. Resto Druids, again, the best pure healing power belt for the last, 5 million years has been the Primal Mooncloth belt. But at this point, nobody in their right mind should even be thinking about running that. Until you get spell haste, technically speaking, the Belt of Divine Guidance, in my opinion, has the best stats. You're not going to want to run that Primal Mooncloth belt, so get that out of your head, and let's put on that Belt of Divine Guidance, and that's sort of our temporary piece until we get spell haste. Both the spell haste belts are going to cost you big time because you don't get gem slots, and so you're going to be losing a lot of extra healing power. Until you have enough spell haste, I'm not going to tell you to replace your beautiful gemmed out Belt of Divine Guidance with something else. Keep in mind that pretty much every other belt from the last phase is suspiciously similar in stats to this. So if you have a Girdle of Zaytar, a Belt of the Long Road, whatever you've got, it's pretty much not that different than this belt. So not even remotely something you should consider upgrading right now, considering as well that you're going to eventually run a spell haste belt in the end. Not really something you should think about too much. Alright, so for our legs, we're going to be running the Leggings of Eternity, and these are, for all intents and purposes, almost identical to the Kilt of Immortal Nature. Do not fall for the Thunderheart Leggings track. This is absolutely a two-horse race. You've got the Leggings of Eternity and the Kilt of Immortal Nature. Naturally, people are going to want to shove you into the Kilt of Immortal Nature, which makes sense because it's leather, but it has slightly worse stats, slightly worse healing. I would run the Leggings of Eternity if I was truly trying to parse as hard as possible. But the Kilt of Immortal Nature works great in PvP as well. It's a BIS PvP piece for pretty much everybody in the highest MMRs. Everyone's going to run it. So if you want to save some gold as well, Kilt of Immortal Nature will be kind of a two birds, one stone situation. I would absolutely be fine with either of these, but do not get the Thunderheart Leg Guards. Do not fall for that. They are just god-awful. All right, so let's get into the boots. And, you know, sometimes, like I said before, there's weird Resto Druid gearing stuff. This has got to be the weirdest of them all. Unfortunately, the Gold Leaf Wild Boots are still BIS. Okay, they're still BIS because they still provide the most possible healing power of any of the boot options you have. And Doomlord Kazakh is still sitting there ready to be killed. So if you do want to go out and get him, this would be your best bet. The boots of the Divine Light, though, thank God these exist because they're really easy to get. And I don't want to downplay, you know, the importance and the feeling of accomplishment you get when you get an item like this. But these drop from Mount Hygel trash. So, I mean, I saw one of these just randomly doing trash at 4 in the morning. So you're definitely going to get these within a couple weeks. And they've got insane stamina. I mean, these are, for all intents and purposes, the same as your Oracle Hide boots or your Soul Strider boots. So barely an upgrade. But wow, the survivability. 47 stamina. That is ridiculous. Definitely going to keep you alive in some fights. And yeah, not a huge upgrade. Don't stress out about your boots. They're one of the last things you have to worry about. But if you can get out to Kazakh, he has unfortunately still got the true BIS boots for the time being. One last thing to note about boots is, of course, the time-honored tradition of vitality versus boar speed, and this is going to depend on what's really, how the raids are feeling. For example, are you dying to mechanics a lot? Are you dying to AoE? When I was dying a lot to Lady Vash and her poison, I decided, hey, I need that speed boost. I need to run boar speed, maybe a little extra stamina as well. The vitality doesn't really make that much of a difference, so it's up to you. But personally, would go with boar speed, though. Vitality is a very, very cheap enchant if you are a little strapped for gold. All right, so let's get to the rings, and the rings are really interesting because obviously long-term, you're going to want these magnificent blessed bands of Karabor with the 30 spell haste. These are going to save you a lot of struggle. For example, you might not have to replace a piece like the belt or the bracers that you love so very much. So, long term, we're going to probably switch to those. But for now, we're going to run the Coral Band of Revive from Lady Vash and the Band of the Eternal Restore, which you'll just naturally get from doing lots and lots of Hygel and trash farms and just doing the raids. So, these are great stats, fantastic across the board. Long term, I would push as quickly as possible to get a Blessed Band of Karabor or two. Obviously, it's going to take time. Long term, you're probably going to run 2 of them. We'll get to the haste gearing in a little bit. But these are great temporary replacements, and the stats are off the chain. They're fantastic. The healing power, everything about these rings. And keep in mind, the Band of the Eternal Restore does have a 10% proc rate. It's going to increase your healing power by 175 for 10 seconds on a 10% proc. So that's a very significant healing power increase. It does factor into your healing overall and is a significant improvement. So I am putting that above the Band of the Karabor right now, the Blessed Band of Karabor, just because you will have a more overall healing. And until you hit that haste cap, it doesn't really make sense to put in one of these Blessed Bands when the stats are just worse. All right, so let's get into trinkets. And unfortunately, this time around, it's kind of boring. You got Dire Brew Hops and you got Essence of Martyr, and that's all you got. So those are the 2 best options, best overall healing. And Memento of Tyran is simply not going to match up. If for whatever reason you're missing the Dire Brew Hops because you never did the event, then go get the Memento of Tyran. That's your best second option, and overall less healing, but it's sort of your backup, your failsafe. If you are pulling really quick and you have the Dire Brew Hops on CD and you already have that plan in advance, you could swap to the Memento of Tyran and have a little bit of extra healing power temporarily. Of course, that's not going to do very much for you, but it is worth looking into if you really want to min-max things. All right, so let's get to the idol. And the idol this time around, still the idol of the Emerald Queen. Still your best bet with that extra healing on the life limb. You got to go get it. If you don't have it, I don't even know what you're doing at this point. Go get that idol. All right, so we've talked about Resto Druid BIS healing gear, but it's time to get to the good stuff. How do we get to 113 spell haste to make the magic happen? Well, it's gonna come down to this. Do you have the Blessed Band of Karabor times 2? Or do you not? Because depending on that will depend on how much fun you get to have. Do you get to have extra fun pieces that you get from raiding? Or do you have to run crafted pieces and end up with lower overall healing and slightly worse stats? It's entirely reliant on what drops here, and we're going to get into all of it. TLDR, across the board, we're going down here. Thunderheart, same helmet, okay? There's no haste pieces for that. The necklace, same necklace, no haste pieces for that. The shoulder here, there is a haste piece here, and this is sort of your last resort because it's a bind on pickup. You can do a tailoring piece, you can do a leatherworking piece. These are your absolute last resort. Really wouldn't be so desperate for haste that I go into this barrel, but if you are, for whatever reason, desperate, you have two options, one of them being the Swift Heal Mantle. As you can see, the stats are not good. You're losing a lot of healing power. Would not go down this route personally, but it is an option if you are, for whatever reason, just absolutely haste crazy. Getting into the cloak, like we talked about before, the Shroud of the Highborn is one of your absolute prio pieces. I would say it's very high on the list next to those beautiful rings we'll talk about in a second. This piece has everything. It's basically like the standard cloak with a standard plus healing, except it also comes with 32 haste. You're only losing 11 healing power, but you're also gaining 32 haste. That's a beautiful trade. I'd take that any day of the week. Remember, of course, 2% reduced threat. Don't forget that enchant. Very important. Getting down to our chest, a Thunderheart tunic. Again, nothing you can do here. Nothing exciting. It's the standard chest. Everyone has to run it. All right, so let's get into the bracers. Like I just had a rant earlier, you may not be able to have fun and run your fun new bracers you got from Hyjal because you may have to run haste bracers. So this is, again, going to completely depend on whether or not you end up with the bands of Karabor that we'll talk about in a second. But if you, for whatever reason, do get two of them, then you get the luxury of running a very fun bracer, for example, the Rejuvenating Bracers, with additional healing power. Lots of fun. Great time. All right, so let's get into our weapon. Same weapon as before. Crystal Spire. 81 healing power. Fantastic. Same offhand. Scepter of Purification. It's fantastic. The same gloves, of course, because Blizzard, for whatever reason, decided to make the haste gloves also the best healing gloves, so nothing to talk about there. Here's the question on the belt. Okay, do you run a haste belt or not? And a lot of people would assume yes, but here's the thing. Okay, the Belt of Divine Guidance is going to be overall more healing because you get 2 gem slots, and you're going to overall end up with more healing. The question here again is, did you end up with the rings? And if you did, then, we're good to go. All right, so let's get into the rings, and for whatever godforsaken reason, these rings are not unique and have 30 spell haste each, which is insane. So you can get 60 spell haste off the rip instantly just by putting on these rings, and the stats are very close to the Coral Band of the Revive, which is kind of insane if you think about it. How good these rings are. They are random drops, so you can get them anywhere in your BT run. Bam, all of a sudden you've got a BIS ring, and these rings are hyper BIS. You need these rings so bad, okay? So, one thing worth noting is that the Coral Band of the Revive, according to some simulations, is slightly worse than the Band of Eternal Restore because that Restorer, with the proc chance, 175 healing for 10 seconds every minute on a 10% chance, is actually going to give you quite a bit of extra healing. So you're going to end up with a maybe around 86 healing power on the ring instead of the Coral Band, which gives you 73. So that is a kind of a significant increase. But of course, procs are procs, and who knows how it works in the current iteration of WoW. The TLDR is if you end up with one Blessed Band of Karabor and one other ring, it should be the Band of the Eternal Restorer and not the Coral Band of the Revive, although it may look otherwise. Here's where it gets interesting, though, because how you get to that 113 haste is going to drastically vary based on what drops are available to you, and also if you're willing to craft some gear as well. So it's all going to kind of, at this point, depend on what you get first and how you get it. And, of course, you can say loot list and prioritize things and have a list like I did with the last guide. But the issue here is these drops, these rings, are such a kingmaker, and they are such a decision maker of what you're going to do next, that, honestly, at this point, you just got to keep in mind the important items. The rings are the most important thing you're going to get in this raid by a wide margin because the stats are just so ridiculously good, and you get the haste as well. The weapon obviously would be your priority always, but you're a Resto Druid, so you're going to be last anyways for that, and you really can't argue in good faith that you should deserve it because it's just going to help the raid more if someone else has it. So the rings are going to end up being your best possible thing you can get. Obviously, get the weapon as soon as humanly possible. And the cloak. The cloak is only 11 healing power worse than the other option, and it gives you that massive 32 spell haste. So absolutely, you want to get that cloak. So in a world where no one's feelings matter at all, you would prioritize the weapon and the rings as soon as humanly possible, and then grab the cloak afterwards, and you would be all set. I wanted to run down a couple different scenarios that would happen. Let's say you don't end up with one of the rings. You get one ring and you don't have one ring. Well, what are you going to do? Well, here's an example build. So You end up with one blessed band. You're going to have your Band of the Eternal Restorer as your trusty sidekick, and you're going to end up with the, a little bit depressing, Swift Heal Wraps. I went on a rant about this earlier in the healing section of the guide. The Swift Heal Wraps are sitting here, and they're replacing your other fun option, for example, your Bracelet of Martyrdom or Rejuvenating Bracer. And you're going to be running the Swift Heal Wraps and losing healing power, but you're going to gain that spell haste. So is this a win overall? Not really, but it's sort of your temporary solution. Okay, so another example that might happen for you is that you get neither of the rings because someone else takes the rings for whatever reason, and they don't like you very much. So you get neither of the rings, so you're going to run your Coral Band of Revive like before, and your Band of the Eternal Restorer like before. And now we've added in a new piece, and that's the belt. So Angelista Sash, a great option. There's an identical clone version of this for whatever reason. They just added a second one in. And that belt is called the Belt of Primal Majesty. Both of them offer 37 spell haste with the 84 healing, with weirdly almost identical stats, very, very minor differences. Either way, these belts are both worse than running any of the other options, for example, the Belt of Divine Guidance, or even something like an old school belt like a Belt of the Long Road. But the TLDR here is, if you don't have a ring and you need to get to that beautiful spell haste we're talking about, which is 113, then you're going to need to do something, and that thing is add a belt. All right, so one final scenario you might run into is that you are going along, you don't end up getting a cloak, so you do not have the wonderful 32 spell haste magic of the Shroud of Highborn. Instead, you end up with a Sunshower Light Cloak or a Shroud of Forgiveness. Well, what are you supposed to do? The solution is simple. You're going to have to swap out your beautiful Thunderheart shoulders we love so much. Those Thunderheart spaulders have to go in the trash. And instead, we're going to turn to the Swift Heal Mantle, which has so much worse healing power. It's kind of depressing to think about. And it's a bind-on pickup claw shoulder, so you have to be tailoring to make it, which is a nightmare. But here's the fun part. There actually is a leatherworking option, which is called the Shoulder Pads of Renewed Life. So if you are leatherworking with lots of gold to spare, and you're just desperate to get to your haste cap, and you just can't stop yourself, well, these shoulders are a good option. Again, you're going to lose healing power. As you can see, the final amount of healing you end up with is 2373. So you're losing almost, significant amount of healing power there. But it is a way to get to that haste cap quickly, and you'll be impressing your friends and rolling extra life blooms, and everyone will be so impressed. Whether you want to spend a bunch of gold and maybe even re-roll your professions just to get that spell haste a little bit faster is up to you. But hey, the game is all about creativity. Play the way you want to play and have as much fun as humanly possible. Overall, I've given you a lot of different options here. The TLDR is what items you get first will determine how you get to that spell haste cap that you desperately need. Keep in mind as well that although you may not be able to, for now, use your favorite bracer or your belt to get to the haste cap, you will eventually get these double bands of Karabor, which are going to fix everything, and they're going to make your gameplay experience so freaking fun and fantastic. All right, so we covered how spell haste works. We covered the healing build that you're going to have to start with. We covered the haste build you'll eventually run into, and all of the beautiful fun you're going to have on your Resto Druid in Phase 3. It's going to be such an absolute blast. I hope you learned a lot. I learned a lot researching for this video and learning everything I could about Resto Druids. I hope you get out there, and if there's one other thing I can recommend, it's Hyjal trash farming. Get a group that doesn't reserve a bunch of stuff and get out there and have so much fun. You'll get great drops. There's BIS pieces you can get. The boots are fantastic. If you don't want to go farm Kazakh, go out there, play the game, have fun, enjoy yourself. And let me know in the comments below what you think of this patch so far. Are you loving Hyjal? Are you loving Black Temple? I want to hear about it in the comments below. Thank you so much for watching, and remember to have a great day.